As this show is released, I am currently rafting the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho, and I'm sure I'm having a total blast. So I thought it'd be a great time to revisit a popular episode back from the fall of 2017 when I was just getting started, whitewater rafting through the Grand Canyon on the Colorado River. So I have with me one of my hiking buddies that I met in Nicaragua on a trip several years ago, telling us about his adventure rafting the Colorado River. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you when I get back from my trip. Talk to you soon. What can be 18 miles wide, up to a mile high, and 277 miles long? I'll give you a hint. A river carved down the sides, exposing 2 billion years worth of geological history. That's right, today we're going to the Grand Canyon. We're going to whitewater raft the entire length, plus take some day hikes when we're not out on the water. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we have Mike Grainger teaching us all about whitewater rafting the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. In 1903, when President Theodore Roosevelt visited the Grand Canyon, he said, "The Grand Canyon fills me with awe. It is beyond comparison, beyond description, absolutely unparalleled throughout the wide world. Let this great wonder of nature remain as it is now. Do nothing to mar its grandeur, sublimity, and loveliness. You cannot improve upon it. But what you can do is to keep it for your children, your children's children, and all who come after you as the one great sight which every American should see." Well said, Teddy. Located in the great state of Arizona, the Grand Canyon is the United States' 15th national park. The Grand Canyon is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is considered one of the great wonders of the world. The mighty Colorado River, over billions of years, little by little carved away the rock, the soil, and the sediment to create this magnificent gorge that should be on everybody's bucket list to see. To begin, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little overview of the trip?
Sure. My name's Mike Grainger. I live in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. I'm 64 years old, and I did the full rafting trip of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in 2011. I had a bit of whitewater rafting experience prior to that, nothing too extreme, but I really enjoyed it, and I was able to talk my wife into coming along. We did this quite late in the season. The last trip of the season started mid-October and ran through to 1st of November. And one of the reasons for doing it at that time was that we got a discount. And I'm always interested in discounts. But there were other good things about it too, because it's quite a bit cooler at that time of year, which makes it much more pleasant for the hiking aspects of the trip.
On most adventures, I generally recommend that you do not bring any cotton. However, this trip is an exception. Because of the heat and the chance of heat, particularly in the summertime, I would recommend bringing long-sleeve cotton shirts and lightweight pants. That way, it'll help keep the sun off of you. It holds the moisture and coolness a little bit better and will be a little bit more comfortable. So that's pretty cool. You're not just whitewater rafting, you're also getting to hike. Is that correct?
That's right. Generally speaking, at least with the commercial trips, they're not going to have you in the boat all day. Generally, you're looking at an average of about 4 hours a day in the boat. And the rest of the time, you're going to be getting out and preparing meals and consuming meals. And other than that, you're going to be doing a bit of hiking. Some of it's going to be fairly close to the river level, and other times you're going to get up thousands of feet above the river level. And those longer hikes, definitely you do not want to be doing that during the hotter times of the year. You're just not going to be able to take the heat. And
what kind of heat were you getting in October?
Well, when we were there, the temperatures, as you can imagine, fluctuate quite a bit through the day. Overnight, we're getting down to near freezing at that time of year. And in the daytime, your temperatures might get up, 60, 70, maybe as far as on the river level, they're not going to get above that. But as you go up above the river, temperatures climb. But even when we were getting higher on hikes, we weren't getting up anything higher than in the 80s. Whereas if you were doing that June, July, August, you'd be looking at temperatures over 100 degrees.
I want to point out something about what Mike just said. If you travel in the shoulder season, early spring or late fall, you'll get the savings on the adventure itself. However, if you don't already own the gear, the heavier duty sleeping bag and puffy jackets and all that, your savings might be eaten up in buying the supplies. So keep that in mind when you're planning your trip. Remember, there's no Holiday Inns along the river. You will be camping. What kind of water temperatures were you looking at, Mike, at that time of year?
Well, it's cold water. One of the things that we did prior to going on the trip, we went with an organization or a company called Arizona Rafting Trips, and they're a well-established company that's been doing it for a long time. And one of the things that they did was give us a kit list and a couple of pieces of equipment that we didn't have previously. We bought neoprene booties and neoprene gloves, and they came in quite handy to deal with that cold water. You want to bring, lots of layers. You want to have a river bag with a dry set of clothes in so that if you do upset into that cold water, you can quickly get changed out of your wet clothes and back into dry. On the river itself, most days it was pretty pleasant, but some days if you were picking up a stiff wind, it could get quite cold. For people who are sitting in the oar boats and not actually being physically active, it could get pretty uncomfortable if you didn't have enough warm clothes on. I was usually in the paddle boat paddling, and there staying warm was not so much of an issue.
I understand there's lots of ways to get down the river. You can oar boat it, raft it, use the dory boat, and even a motorboat, and you use the raft. Is that correct?
We were on what they called a hybrid trip. So we had a number of the standard oar boats. I can't remember whether it was three or four, something like that. We had one dory boat, and we had a paddle boat. So, and in the paddle boat, you have six paddlers and a captain. And people rotated in and out of the paddle boat. The keener you were to paddle, and the better you were at weaseling your way in, the more often you got to be in the paddle boat. Some people never went in the paddle boat. Some people just went, one time just to have the experience, and some of us were in it as often as we could get there. The dory boat was another interesting alternative that everybody wanted to have a chance in. You're not paddling in that, but it's a much smaller, more agile craft. It's an aluminum boat that originally was modeled on Portuguese fishing boats, and over the years has been modified for running the rapids in the Grand Canyon. It's been made wider and lower, but they're excellent because they can have a lot of storage capacity in them, and it can, they're a more exciting ride than the bigger rafts. So when you're a passenger in that, you're getting a bit of a thrill ride without actually having to do the paddling yourself.
Can you tell us a little bit about the different vessels so that we understand what the different options are there, please?
Okay, well, an oar boat is going to be an inflatable raft, a fairly large inflatable raft, and you have one of the boatmen, the professionals, is manning two large sweep oars, one for each hand, and they do all the steering of the boat. So they might tell the passengers or warn them, okay, get down, make sure that you've got a good center of gravity is low. They might direct them to lean one way or another in the boat. But in terms of navigation and propulsion of the boat, that's all up to the boatman, and the passengers are along for the ride. And besides the passengers, they're carrying a lot of gear. You have to be entirely self-sufficient on these trips, so they're going to be carrying all the food, and everything has to be packed out. So, food gets consumed, but there's still garbage and human waste to be packed out of there. And they have a lot of compartments there. And of course, you've got all your camping gear, sleeping bags, tents, etc. So that all that has to go somewhere. Drinking water, all that kind of thing. That's your ore boat.
In our last adventure to Cassis, I reminded folks that they need to bring a baggie to pack out their used toilet paper. When you do this Grand Canyon adventure, you're not just packing out your toilet paper, you're also packing out your human waste. So if you're a bit squeamish about that, this may not be the adventure for you. Now back to Mike.
Those boats can be, or those rafts can be motorized so that you can go down the canyon faster, fewer days, makes for a less expensive trip, which is going to be more popular with some folks. Then, as I say, the dory boats are made out of aluminum. They have a boat shape as opposed to sort of the round raft shape. You have a single boatman who is running that, and you'll have room for maybe 4 passengers on it. The paddle boat is a smaller inflatable raft, and you don't have any cargo in it. A captain, he's at the back of the boat, 6 paddlers, 3 on each side, and the captain is responsible for the navigation of the boat, and he's reading the river, and when you're approaching rapids, he gives commands to the paddlers to position the boat where he wants it to enter the rapid, and gives commands to maneuver the boat as required going through the rapid to avoid big holes, standing waves, things like that. So he'll shout out a command. It might be paddle forward, paddle back, or he may say right forward or left forward. And the paddlers have to understand, on each side what you do and based on the command that's been given. You may have something where the paddler who's closest to the captain will shout the command or repeat the command so that all the paddlers hear it clearly. When you're in really heavy rapids, it can be very noisy, and it would be easy to have the captain's voice drowned out to a certain extent and the command not clearly heard by everybody. It's important that the paddlers understand what the commands mean and they react to the commands instantly if possible, because the captain sees, all right, if we don't change direction quickly, we're going to be upset by the river feature that we're coming into. Another command that he might give is high side, which means that there's danger of the boat flipping. So he wants everybody to get their weight shifted over to the side that's about to be flipped up over to keep it down if possible. So that's kind of gives you an idea of the differences between the boats. When you go on that sort of hybrid trip, you can be someone like me who is looking for as much paddling action as possible, or you can be someone like my wife who had no previous whitewater experience whatsoever. She'd never been in a raft before, and she had good time going down the river in the oar boats primarily, although she did ride in the dory a couple of times. She never went in the paddle boat, not interested in doing paddling herself.
I love how on this hybrid trip, you're able to choose that day what kind of ride you feel like doing, whether you want some excitement or you'd rather sit back and let the captain do all the work. Doing a hybrid trip allows for couples and families with different activity levels and adventure levels to participate in the same adventure, but at their own skill and comfort level.
Now, you mentioned safety, and you were given a pretty good briefing about what to do if your raft is upset. You are kind of the basic idea is don't panic. Understand that the staff of the boatmen are professionals. They understand how to do a rescue if necessary. But most of the time, all that's going to happen is you're going to go in the water and you're going to come out and you're going to see where your boat is and you're going to come towards it. They're going to come towards you. If necessary, they'll throw you a line. One of the things that they did say was that you should, as you're coming up, you should have your hand up above your head so that if for some reason you happen to come up right underneath the raft, you simply walk your hands out in any direction so that you come out from under the boat. That was basically the instructions we were given.
Were you or your fellow passengers ever thrown from the raft?
Yeah, I had an interesting experience. Just to give you some background on what the whole overview of the trip is, you're going for 226 miles on the river through the Grand Canyon, and that's called the full canyon trip. Takes at the time of year we did it, it was a 16-day trip. Apparently, at other seasons with longer days, maybe different water flow, it can be done in 14 days. Also was 16. During that time, you're going to go through roughly 50 significant rapids and maybe half a dozen pretty serious rapids, class 4 plus. There's also an option to do just the first half of the canyon or just the second half of the canyon. And for the people who want that option, they hike down the Bright Angel Trail to Phantom Ranch, and that's where the switch is made.
If you don't have time to do the entire length of the trail, an option is to do a 2 to 5 day excursion. However, this does require a very difficult hike on the Bright Angel Trail. This trail runs about 4 to 5 hours with 4,400 vertical change of elevation, and it's over 7.5 miles. There is the possibility of a mule to either pack your stuff or to pack you. However, those get booked up like a year in advance. You can't necessarily count on that. If you choose to do the upper canyon, which would be an 88-mile rafting trip, you will have to hike up the trail. If you do the lower canyon, which has the more aggressive rapids, and 192 miles, you hike down the trail. And don't forget, for each, you have to carry your water, food, and your belongings. So this is not a good option for somebody that's not in pretty good physical shape. Rafting the entire canyon is an option for people that are not quite as fit.
So when we had gone through the first half of the canyon and got there and did the changeover, we had a number of new people join us there. And our boat captain, Brad Demick, an extremely experienced boatman, he'd been on the river for 35 years. And in that time, he had never had an inflatable boat, a raft, flip on him. Never happened. And I guess maybe that gave him quite a bit of confidence, probably rightly so. He took on, in the paddle boat, after the changeover, 3 new people who had never been in the boat before. And there were 3 of us who had been in it quite a bit up to that point. And he went over the paddling commands with the newcomers, did a little bit of practicing, and then we headed off down the river. And in a fairly short distance, 7 miles or so, you come to one of the major rapids called the Horn Creek Rapid. It's one of the trickier ones to navigate. There's in some of the rapids, really, you just enter them at the right place and you just take the ride. There's not a need to do much maneuvering while you're actually in the rapid. But in the Horn Creek Rapid, there's a couple of obstacles that you have to actively avoid. Brad gave us the commands. The team just did not respond fast enough, strongly enough. He didn't get the movement out of that paddle boat that he needed, and we high-sided. And I was on the high side, got driven down into the river. So I'm on the boat down the river, and it's pretty much completely black. I couldn't see any light at that point. So I put my hand up above my head and, wait for to surface and wait a bit more. And I start to think to myself, I think I'm going to have to breathe again sometime. So screw this, putting my arm up in the air, and I started pulling for the surface as hard as I could. And I was a very happy man when I broke the surface of the water. And once that happened, the drama was pretty much over. I got back into the boat relatively easily. And we got off the shore and, change of clothes, dried out. And really the only long-term casualty was my waterproof camera, which, waterproof or not, I was down deep enough that it forced some water in, and it kind of worked, but there was condensation in it, so most of the pictures Didn't from then on weren't that great. I don't know how deep I was, but I'm guessing I was probably somewhere between 20 and 30 feet deep. That was exciting enough.
I'll bet. I'm sure your adrenaline was racing. Tell us what it feels like to go through the rapids.
Well, going through a big rapid, when you hit a standing wave and the front end of the raft goes up in the air, that's exciting. There's a lot of whooping and hollering going on. When you're in the regular oar boat or in the dory boat, you're just along for the ride, and it's a thrill ride, like on a roller coaster. When you're in the paddle boat, you're having to, as well as the thrill of the ride, there's also the the tension and the excitement. You don't want to screw up. You want to make sure that you're on the ball, that you're listening to your captain, that you interpret the captain saying correctly, that you respond immediately. One little added wrinkle I had when I was in the paddle boat was that one of the guys who was in the boat a lot was pretty deaf. He would sit right up next to the captain, but even then, I wasn't sure he was always getting the command. So even though I was sitting furthest away from the captain, I would immediately bellow the command as loud as I could, just to be sure that this guy got it. He was a really good guy, but the slight hearing loss sometimes was a bit of an impediment. The other really exciting thing is that there's the most famous and I guess you might say intimidating of the rapids on the river is Lava Creek Falls. And it doesn't happen until about mile 179. So for much of the time you're on the river, you know that you've got that ahead of you. That was pretty exciting because what you do there is you before you get there, you pull off to the side, and in our case it was Brad Demick, the paddleboat captain. He got out and had his boat crew with him, and you hike along and you get up onto hike over a set of lava formed rocks, and you get up on a big rock that overlooks the river, and he scouts the river, takes a look at it, makes some judgments about where he thinks the best place to enter it, where's the best part of the channel to be in as you're going through. And he's got a walkie-talkie, and he goes back, and then sort of the most experienced and confident of the other boatmen will take a raft through and see whether Brad's reading of the river made sense. And you watch them go through and get bounced around pretty good, but they get through all right. And then you have another raft go through and so on and so on. And then finally, we in the paddle boat went through last. And we did have one of the rafts that flipped going through there, but it wasn't us this time. But again, we had no difficulty rescuing the people. We had lines set up along there so that we were able to get a line out to the people in the water and get them into the shore pretty readily.
That rapid sounds super exciting. About how long is it?
Well, I don't remember how long it is in distance, but it is pretty long. But you go through it so fast, it's only about 20 seconds.
When they say falls, are we talking a big drop? Or what are we talking about?
Well, they call it falls because, first of all, you have to understand that the Colorado River going through the Grand Canyon is almost just a flat water river. There's very little actual elevation change compared to most whitewater rivers, maybe about a quarter of what it is on many whitewater rivers. And it isn't really any steeper than a river like the Missouri, which most people don't consider to be a river that you would do any rafting on at all. What makes the rapids is where you've had side streams that empty into the Colorado. At certain seasons of the year, they have extremely high flow rates, and they wash huge amounts of debris into the Colorado, which has the effect of narrowing the channel at that point. And that's what increases your river speed. And that's what also these various huge boulders and beds of boulders that have been washed in provide some of the obstacles that create your holes and your standing waves. So there will be at a place like Lava Falls, there will be an actual drop or change in elevation that is more than you typically get, and the channel has been narrowed by debris. So you've got both those things operating. So it's not like a waterfall. It is, as you said, more like a series of rapids that you're going through.
Most whitewater rapids are rated on a grade of 1 to 6, with 6 being impassable. The Grand Canyon has a unique rating system of 1 to 10, and you'll hit most of those on this adventure. So do you consider the second half of the river the more challenging half?
Well, I think obviously Lava Falls is in the second half, and so is Horn Creek Rapids, and they're two of the worst of them. So yeah, if you did the first half, you would avoid those, but you're still going to hit some Class 4 rapids. But if you're in the ore boat, the chances of you coming out of that ore boat are very, very, very small.
I've been to the Grand Canyon, but I've only seen it from the top. Can you describe what it's like when you're down below looking up? What does the landscape look like?
Oh, it's fantastic. When you're going through some of the narrower parts of the canyon, just looking and seeing how the river is framed by the rocks on each side. And there's some areas where there's just really cool looking, just the rock is just really cool to look at. You can see the different layers of rock, so that, the color of the rock, the directions, whether it's sort of horizontal or vertical, whether there's fault lines, those change in layers. It's always changing, and it's always exciting and interesting. And some of these side canyons that you go for little hikes up. Sometimes you're on trails beside the canyon. Sometimes you're actually walking up the little streams. Some of it will be water in the side canyons. There'll be little pools where the water is a bit warmer, and you can just sort of soak your feet in them for a while. It's pretty cool.
What kind of physical shape do you need to be to do this kind of trip, and do you need to train for it?
Well, if all you're wanting to do is just go down the canyon in a boat, you don't need to be particularly physically fit. Obviously, you have to have reasonable fitness, but nothing that's dramatic, nothing that's out of the way. If you want to do the hiking, then you need to have good hiking fitness, because you're dealing with a situation where you're going to at some points reach a fair amount of elevation, and you're going to be in, these are not constructed trails, so there's going to be a certain amount of walking over rough, uneven terrain. And you don't want to hold the group up. The group wants to move at a fairly good clip. And you have to be able to deal with potential, depending on what time of year you go, you might be dealing with quite a bit of heat and dehydration. So some general hiking fitness is probably worthwhile. Now, if you're wanting to actually be in the paddle boat and paddle, then you need to have quite a bit more upper body fitness. And it helps if you, obviously, the more experience you've got, the better. And also, you need good core strength. So you don't want to be straining back muscles and abdominal muscles, etc. So, yeah, you need more fitness to be doing that. But and then again, if you're going in one of the motorized rafts, you're not going to be out there as long either. Besides physical fitness, I guess you'd have to say there's a certain amount of mental fitness required, because you're potentially 16 days on the river, and that's kind of what there is. There's the river and the canyon and the other people in your group, and not a whole lot of outside distraction. And you start the day by getting up and helping make breakfast, eat breakfast, you take down your tent. Every day you've got load the boats up. You do a couple of hours, maybe 2 to 3 hours on the river, and then you stop and you get out the tables and equipment you need to prepare lunch, make lunch, do some sort of activity, maybe go for a hike, and then another hour or two on the river, and then you've got to unload the boats and put up your tents, and then you've got, again, prepare the meal, clean up after the meal, And then you've got whatever ways you have of amusing yourself, playing cards, telling stories. Somebody gets out a guitar and there's a sing along, all sorts of things. For the most part, it's quite pleasant, but as in any small group travel situation, there's going to be some folks whose company you really enjoy and some not so much. And you've got to sort of navigate that as you go along.
Mike's description of the idle times reminds me a bit of backpacking. I wondered before I first started backpacking, what am I going to do in my downtime? I mean, I'm hiking anywhere between 6 to 10, 12 hours a day, depending on the day. But you've got all this leftover time. You don't have any electronic devices. You're out in the middle of nowhere. I was shocked to find I was not once bored. And I think Mike is saying the same thing here in the Grand Canyon, that for some reason, when you're out in the wilderness, everything just fascinates you and relaxes you, and it's not like anything I've ever experienced, but I was definitely never, ever bored in the wild. That being said, you need to seriously consider your ability to be out on the river this length of time. There are very few options to getting off the river outside of course, emergencies. So once you're on, you're pretty much committed for the route, except for the 1 or 2 exit points. Speaking about the people in the group, can you tell us a little bit about them?
First of all, you're not going to be doing this trip unless you can afford certain financial investment. I know you don't want to hear dollar figures because it dates it, but it's not huge, but it's not insignificant either. So right away, that puts a certain limit on who's going to be doing it. So you're going to have more professionals, etc., than the general population. They tend to be people who are interested in life, looking to challenge themselves, looking for new experiences, people of both sexes, all ages. I was far from the oldest person on that trip. At that time, I would have been late 50s, and there were people, I'd say, into the early 70s on that trip. People from North America, but also people from Britain, Europe. As I say, generally speaking, nice people. But there's always going to be some people who are maybe a little bit too type A, too focused on their experience and not focused enough on how their actions impact the group. It's always interesting to note that after a day or two, you can sort of identify who's who in those different categories. This was a trip where you can't expect the boatman to do everything. There's work to be done. There's gear to be loaded and unloaded. There's food to prepare. There's cleanup to be done. It was interesting to see how there's some people who are always right at the front of the line to pitch in, and some people who, for some reason or other, always seem to have something else they were engaged in at the time and just sort of missed the opportunity to help. I'm sure they would have helped if they'd just been there at the right place at the right time, but it just didn't happen that often.
That seems to happen a lot in life, doesn't it? How about the night sky? There must be very little light pollution.
Oh, I have to admit, I'm by no means an astronomer, but if that was your thing, it would be a great place to be. Yes, the night sky was fantastic. Some of the boatmen knew quite a bit about it and were able to identify all the different constellations and planets and stars, and it was a great place to view that. It's really a beautiful place to be on those beaches as you're going down there. It's just great. It's interesting too that each year some beaches campsites get washed away and some new ones form. So there's for the trip operators, there's always a fair amount of adaptability, flexibility, planning required to make things go smoothly.
Speaking of outfitters, the National Park Service has a list of the pre-approved quality concessioners that have permits to run commercial river rafting and boating trips down the Colorado. And I'll have a link to that on the activetraveladventures.com website. In the travel planner for this episode, I'll have the recommendations that we got from Mike today too as well. Do all the outfitters camp at the same campsite, so at night all the different rafting companies are all camping in the same area, or do you split up?
I think they try to avoid that. These beaches are not very big, and they try to keep the impact as low as possible. Now, I really don't know for sure because I don't think there were any other commercial groups on the river at the time of year that we were there at the last half of October. So it's possible that at other times of the year, in more peak periods, they do end up sharing. But I would say that generally speaking, they would prefer to give you an experience where you're the only group on that particular campsite.
Were you able to see much wildlife while you're out there?
Well, there's birds. To tell you the truth, I didn't see a whole lot of critters. That was not something that made a big impact on me.
How about bugs?
Bugs were not an issue.
So, what do you have to be concerned with?
Really, you had to worry about sun exposure and temperature regulation, and that was mostly what your issues were.
Did going on this trip change you? And if so, how?
Well, I'll be honest here, I don't really think it changed me a whole lot. I guess I already had a propensity for pushing myself physically and for taking on new experiences and taking on a certain amount of risk. And this was just kind of in that vein. But at the same time, it definitely a highlight of the things I've done. For someone who had maybe this was their first step into something with this much commitment, this much isolation, I can see where they might see it as being more of a life-changing event.
Were most of the people on this trip experienced rafters or were they first timers?
All over the place. Some of them were, I would say, were considerably more experienced than I was. Some of them, no experience. So that was a very broad spectrum as far as experience goes. Whitewater rafting experience is not required at all to go down the Colorado through the Grand Canyon.
Let's talk again about safety and what kind of risks there are with the different vessels.
Well, when you're in the full-sized inflatable rafts with a boatman, I would say that the risk level is pretty low. It's never going to be risk-free, though, because the river changes. The flow rate of the river changes quite a bit. Rapids can change from year to year based if they've had new debris brought into them by the side streams that feed into it. Even professional boatmen are human. They could make a mistake. So you could be someone in one of those rafts and flip. And if everything went wrong, you could die. So it's not risk-free. On the other hand, I would put the risk level as being pretty darn low.
Let's review again the safety and the risk involved depending on which kind of boat you're on.
I don't see it as being a particularly risky activity. If you're in the dory, it's probably a little bit riskier just because the dory is more easily upset. But again, probably if you're in the dory, the boatman who is in charge of it is highly skilled and is not going to do anything stupid, and you're probably going to be fine. Paddle boat is riskier because the captain is only giving instructions. He can't carry out the instructions. And he's got amateurs, and the amateurs are much more likely to make a mistake. And it's a smaller craft, and it's more easily flipped. So the risk of getting in the water is considerably higher, I would say. But even if you're flipped, things would have to go pretty wrong. You'd have to somehow be knocked unconscious, I think, because you're going to come to the surface, and there's going to be someone there to help you when you come to the surface. So, yeah, there's a level of risk there, and definitely higher than in the other craft. But again, to me, I don't think it's outrageous.
We mentioned before that this is an expensive trip. Looking back, was it worth every penny?
Yes, definitely. You're talking 16 days here, all meals and accommodation. So, I don't think it was out of the way at all for what you get.
So would you say you'd have to be in really sharp physical condition to do this trip?
No, not really. I do think that it's something that is well worth doing. And it's very accessible. If you think that you would like to do it and you can afford to do it, then go do it.
Our thanks to Mike Grainger for sharing his experiences whitewater rafting the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. You can see his photos and get more information about this epic adventure at the activetraveladventures.com website. You can find it on the directory page using the search bar or go to activetraveladventures.com/canyon for episode 54 today. On that page, too, you can click on to get the free travel planner that'll help you plan this trip for yourself, or that comes automatically if you sign up for the newsletter. There's a button on the website there, so you can do that as well. I don't spam you or sell your information, and I just send out one monthly newsletter to cover whatever downloads or travel planners or PDFs that we covered in the previous month. It usually comes out the first week of each month for whatever I did the month before. Anyhow, I'm sure glad that you're here today. I hope you enjoyed our program, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.